My husband wanted an open marriage until it opened for me too. My husband wanted an open marriage. At least that's what he called it. The funny thing is, he only liked the idea when he thought it would benefit him. The moment it started benefiting me too, everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband, Ryan, and I had been married for 7 years. For most of that time, I genuinely thought we were happy. We weren't the couple posting perfect photos online every day, but we had a good life. A nice home, stable jobs, shared friends, weekend traditions. The kind of marriage that felt comfortable, maybe too comfortable. Looking back, the signs started about a year before everything exploded. Ryan became obsessed with his appearance. New clothes, new hairstyle, expensive cologne. A gym membership he'd suddenly never miss. At first, I thought it was great. People should take care of themselves. But then something felt different. He wasn't becoming more attentive toward me. He was becoming more attentive toward everyone else. Whenever we'd go out, he'd spend half the night checking who was looking at him. His phone was always face down. Notifications suddenly became private. And every time I asked about it, he'd act like I was imagining things. One evening we were having dinner when he casually dropped a sentence that changed everything. "What do you think about open marriages?" I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He looked completely serious. I remember putting my fork down and staring at him. "Where did that come from?" He shrugged. "Just curious." Nobody asks that question out of nowhere, nobody. The conversation ended awkwardly, and I hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, he kept bringing it up: articles, podcasts, videos, stories about couples who supposedly became happier after opening their marriages. It felt less like curiosity and more like a sales pitch. Then one night he finally said what he really wanted. "I think we should consider it." Room went silent. I honestly thought I had misheard him. We should consider what? An open marriage. I couldn't believe this conversation was happening, 7 years together, and suddenly he wanted to rewrite the rules. I asked the obvious question. Why? His answer sounded rehearsed. Something about freedom, personal growth, experiencing life, trust. The more he talked, the less convincing he sounded. Because none of it felt genuine. It felt like he had already made up his mind, like he was trying to sell me on a decision he'd already made. I told him no immediately, not angry, not emotional, just no, I wasn't interested. That should have ended the discussion. Instead, it became a weekly debate. Every few days he'd find a way to bring it up, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Eventually, I got tired of arguing and asked a question I should have asked much sooner. "Is there someone else?" The look on his face lasted less than a second, but it was enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. "No." Too fast, way too fast. The answer came before I even finished speaking. That's when my instincts started screaming. Something wasn't right. A few weeks later, I found proof. Not dramatic proof. No secret messages, no shocking photographs, just a receipt. A receipt for an expensive dinner, on a night he'd supposedly been working late. The problem, I knew exactly where he'd claimed to be. And it wasn't that restaurant. When I asked him about it, he had an explanation ready. A client meeting. Business expenses, nothing unusual, technically possible. But I didn't believe him. The trust had already started cracking. Then came the conversation that changed everything. Ryan sat me down one Saturday afternoon. His expression was unusually confident, almost excited. And that's never a good sign. He started talking about compromise. About meeting in the middle, about modern relationships. Then he made his proposal, an open marriage officially, not a discussion anymore, a proposal. And this time he wasn't asking, he was expecting. I remember staring at him and realizing something. He wasn't worried, not even slightly. In fact, he looked incredibly relaxed, like someone who already knew the outcome. That's when a strange thought crossed my mind. Ryan wasn't nervous because he assumed I'd never actually participate. In his mind, this arrangement only worked one way. He'd spent months improving his appearance, expanding his social circle, building confidence. Meanwhile, I'd been focused on work, home life, and our marriage. He genuinely believed he would have all the opportunities, and I'd have none. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about equality. This wasn't about freedom. This was about him wanting permission. Permission he hoped would come with no consequences. And suddenly I got curious. Very curious, I asked him one question. "If I agree, the same rules apply to both of us, right?" He smiled. "Of course." Answer came far too easily, like he'd never seriously considered the possibility. Then I asked another question. "And you won't get upset if I meet someone?" He laughed, actually laughed. Why would I? That laugh told me everything. He wasn't worried because he didn't think it would happen. Not once had he considered that possibility. A week later, against every expectation he had, I agreed. Not because I suddenly wanted an open marriage, not because I thought it was a good idea, but because I wanted to see what happened when reality collided with his assumptions. And reality arrived much faster than either of us expected. Because less than a month later, something happened that completely changed the dynamic, something Ryan never saw coming. Neither did Ian when he found out about it. His enthusiasm for an open marriage disappeared almost overnight. For the first couple of weeks, nothing really happened. At least not on my side. Ryan, however, suddenly seemed very busy, a lot of late evenings, a lot of meeting friends. A lot of time spent staring at his phone with a grin he tried very hard to hide. Oddly enough, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was observing, watching, learning. Because the more comfortable he became, the more careless he became. He acted like he'd just won the lottery, like he'd unlocked some secret level of life. And every time I saw that smug expression, I became more convinced that he'd never expected me to actually participate. Then something unexpected happened. My company hosted a professional networking event. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic, just a normal event. I almost didn't go. I had deadlines. I was tired. But a coworker convinced me. That decision ended up changing everything. At the event, I met someone named Daniel. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, no, this wasn't some instant fairy tale romance. In fact, our first conversation was mostly about work, then books, then travel, then random life experiences. Hours passed without me noticing. What stood out wasn't attraction. It was respect. Daniel listened when I spoke, asked questions, remembered details. Something I hadn't realized I was missing. When I got home that night, Ryan was sitting on the couch. How was the event? Good. That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, he kept asking questions. Who was there? How long did it last? Did I talk to anyone interesting? The curiosity surprised me. Until I realized why. For the first time, the arrangement wasn't theoretical anymore. Suddenly, there was a possibility I might actually enjoy myself. And Ryan didn't seem quite as confident as before. A few days later, Daniel sent me a message. Perfectly polite, nothing inappropriate. Just continuing a conversation we'd started at the event, I replied. Then he replied. Then we kept talking slowly, naturally, no games, no pressure, just conversation. The funny thing was, I wasn't hiding any of it. I had no reason to. The rules were Ryan's idea. Transparency had been one of his biggest talking points, so I was transparent. And that's where things started getting interesting. One evening, my phone buzzed while Ryan and I were watching television. I glanced at the screen. Ryan noticed. His eyes immediately shifted toward the notification, not subtly, not casually, obviously. Who's that? The question came faster than he intended. I looked at him. Daniel. His expression changed, only for a second, but I caught it. A flash of discomfort, then he quickly smiled. Oh, that was all he said. But from that moment forward, everything felt different. The confidence was fading. The certainty was fading. The enthusiasm was fading. And the irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had spent months convincing me how healthy and modern this arrangement would be was suddenly becoming anxious about the exact arrangement he created. Then came the dinner. Daniel invited me to dinner one Friday evening. Again, completely within the boundaries Ryan himself had insisted upon. I told Ryan about it. Immediately, no secrets, no games, nothing hidden. And that's when I saw genuine panic for the first time. He tried to hide it, failed miserably. Oh, there was that word again. Oh, then he started asking questions, lots of questions. Where, how long, who else would be there, what were my plans afterward? The interrogation became so obvious that even he seemed embarrassed. Finally, I asked him directly. You uncomfortable? No, the answer came too quickly, way too quickly. The exact same way he'd answered me months earlier when I'd asked if there was someone else. Funny how people reveal themselves. The dinner was wonderful, not because it was romantic, because it was easy, comfortable, fun. For the first time in a long time, I spent an evening laughing without feeling like I was carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. When I got home, Ryan was awake, waiting, not pretending to watch television, actually waiting. The moment I walked through the door, he looked up. How was it? I smiled. It was nice. Wrong answer, at least from his perspective, because the moment I said that, I watched something shift behind his eyes. He hadn't wanted me to have a terrible time. He'd wanted me to have a forgettable time, a boring time, a disappointing time. Instead, I'd enjoyed myself. And suddenly his grand idea wasn't nearly as appealing. Over the next few weeks, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Ryan became increasingly irritated, not openly, subtly. Passive-aggressive comments, strange questions, unexpected mood swings. At one point, he actually asked if I thought I was spending too much time talking to Daniel. I nearly laughed. Too much time? The man who had practically delivered presentations about freedom and independence was now monitoring my text messages. The hypocrisy was astonishing. But the real twist came a month later. And it didn't involve Daniel. It involved one of Ryan's friends, a friend who clearly felt guilty. A friend who apparently knew things I didn't. One afternoon, she asked if we could meet for coffee. She seemed nervous, extremely nervous. The entire conversation felt strange. Then finally, she took a deep breath and said something that made my stomach drop. "You need to know the truth." I immediately knew this wasn't going to be good. "What truth?" She hesitated, looked around, then lowered her voice. "Ryan didn't come up with the open marriage idea because of some philosophy about relationships." My heart started pounding. Because suddenly all those months of pressure made sense. All those articles, all those conversations, all those speeches. She looked directly at me, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. There was already someone he wanted permission to pursue before he ever brought it up. Room went completely silent. And in that moment, every piece of the puzzle finally started falling into place. The gym, the phone, the confidence, the pressure, the timing, everything. But what she told me next was even worse. Because Ryan's plan hadn't just backfired, it had completely exploded in a way he never expected. And once I learned the full story, I realized our marriage was about to reach a crossroads neither of us could avoid. I just sat there staring at her. Part of me wanted to hear the rest. Another part of me already knew enough, because suddenly everything made sense. The months of pressure, the constant discussions, the confidence, the certainty. Ryan hadn't been proposing a new lifestyle. He'd been asking for permission, permission he hoped would protect him from consequences. His friend looked genuinely uncomfortable, like she'd been carrying this secret for a long time. Finally, she continued. A woman joined their social circle months before he brought up the idea. I stayed quiet. At first, it seemed harmless. But then Ryan started talking about her constantly. My stomach tightened. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. The pieces fit too perfectly. The friend explained that several people in their group had noticed it. Ryan always found excuses to sit near her, talk to her, include her in plans. Nothing openly inappropriate, nothing dramatic, just enough to make people suspicious. Then came the part that really mattered. According to the friend, Ryan had assumed the open marriage discussion would solve everything. He thought it would create a situation where nobody could accuse him of crossing boundaries. There was just one problem: reality didn't cooperate. Because the woman apparently wasn't interested in him the way he imagined. Not even close. In fact, according to what his friend had heard, she viewed him as a married guy who talked a lot. That was it. Months of planning, months of pressure, months of risking our marriage. And the grand fantasy wasn't even real. I almost laughed, almost. Instead, I thanked his friend for being honest and drove home. The entire ride, my mind kept replaying every conversation Ryan and I had ever had about the open marriage. Now I could hear the hidden meaning behind every word: freedom, translation, permission, growth, translation, opportunity, modern relationships, translation. I want something different without ending my marriage. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew things couldn't continue the way they had been. Not because of Daniel, not because of jealousy, because honesty had disappeared. And without honesty, none of the rest mattered. That evening, I asked Ryan a simple question. Why did you really want an open marriage? The color immediately drained from his face, not all at once, just enough to tell me I'd hit the target. What do you mean? I almost admired the attempt, almost. Know about her. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that feels loud. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan sat down. And for the first time in months, the confidence was completely gone. No speeches, no articles, no carefully prepared arguments. Just a man realizing the truth had finally caught up with him. What followed wasn't some dramatic confession. It was something worse. A series of excuses, confusion, justifications, half-truths. He never fully admitted everything. He didn't need to. His reaction told me more than words ever could. Then came the most surprising moment of the entire conversation. Ryan looked at me and said, I didn't think things would go this way. That sentence hit harder than all the others, because it was probably the most honest thing he'd said. He genuinely hadn't expected this outcome. He expected me to resist, then eventually agree. then stay exactly where I'd always been, predictable, available, safe. Meanwhile, he'd explore new possibilities. Instead, something very different happened. For the first time in years, I started rebuilding parts of my life that had nothing to do with him. New friendships, new experiences, new confidence. And Ryan hated it, not because I had done anything wrong, because he no longer controlled the outcome. A few weeks later, we started marriage counseling, not because everything was fixed, because we finally stopped pretending. The conversations were uncomfortable, painfully uncomfortable, but they were honest. More honest than anything we'd discussed in years. One session in particular changed everything. The counselor asked Ryan a question, a very simple question. If your wife had suggested this first, would you have agreed? The room went quiet. Ryan didn't answer, not immediately. The silence lasted so long that it became an answer by itself. Eventually, he admitted the truth, probably not. And there it was, the entire problem in one sentence. The rules had only seemed fair when he imagined himself benefiting from them. The moment he pictured me having the same freedom, everything changed. For months afterward, we had difficult decisions to make. Trust wasn't magically restored. Trust never works that way. It takes time, effort, consistency. And even then, there are no guarantees. Some marriages don't survive situations like this. Ours nearly didn't. But what ultimately saved us wasn't the open marriage. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even counseling. It was accountability. Ryan finally stopped defending his choices and started taking responsibility for them. And I stopped accepting explanations that didn't make sense. For the first time in a long time, we were actually dealing with reality instead of stories we'd been telling ourselves. Today, when people ask me what happened, I usually keep it simple. My husband wanted an open marriage, until it opened for me too. And the moment he realized the rules applied equally, he discovered something important. It's easy to ask for freedom when you think you're the only one who will use it. It's much harder when everyone gets the same opportunity. That lesson nearly cost us our marriage, and neither of us will ever forget it.